Discover the incredible truth. The mocked farmer's simple clothes hide the wealth of a nation. Jack Thompson's calloused hands gripped his coffee cup tighter as laughter erupted around him in the small diner. The usual suspects were gathered, businessmen dressed in crisp suits, their voices dripping with condescension. They shot glances his way, their smirks a reminder of how they viewed him, nothing more than a simple farm boy lost in their world of ambition. His fingers trembled from a mix of frustration and familiarity. They couldn't see the wealth beneath the dirt on his boots, the bountiful legacy carved over generations. What he held within knowledge of the land, a vision of sustainable yield, felt more valuable than the grasping hands of the corporate interests that encircled the town. He raised the cup to his lips, taking a sip of the cold coffee, its bitterness matching the ache of isolation gnawing at his chest. Jack's heart wrestled with each bitter taste. Why couldn't the townsfolk see beyond his worn jeans and frayed overalls? Why did their laughter pierce through him so easily? He spent nights studying his great-grandfather's journals, records of practices that could heal the land and lift the economic weight off Maplewood's shoulders. But as he pondered this vision, doubts crept into his mind like weeds choking the roots of a burgeoning idea. The truth was clear. He was scared. Scared to confront their ridicule. Scared to step into the light of potential. He inhaled sharply, reminding himself that he was bound to this land by more than soil. He felt the echoes of his ancestors urging him to hold tight, to fight for what he believed instead of standing there, waiting for the sly remarks to pass like shadows over his identity. Then Mr. Miller entered his life, a retired scientist whose crisp ideas both captivated and terrified him. Over shared cups of coffee, Jack absorbed the knowledge that ignited a fire within. Together, they plotted a revolution in farming that could redefine agricultural practices in Maplewood. The very thought filled him with hope, but also heightened the weight of expectation. What would happen when he began advocating these changes in town meetings? What if the laughter turned to fury, a backlash against the very essence of tradition they cherished? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With his heart racing, Jack stepped into the town hall, the whispers swirling around him like a tempest. The weight of disdain hung over him, a dark cloud born of the very faces who had once mocked the idea of him showing up here as a leader. His throat went dry as he caught the glint in their eyes. Apprehension, or was it expectation of ridicule? What if he failed? A part of him begged to retreat, to hide behind the familiar rows of corn he knew so well. But the other half, the one honed through years on the land, pushed him forward. What if he could shatter their preconceptions and show them the truth? A truth that rested in his heart like the crops bound to emerge from the soil. And yet, standing there, the podium felt like a noose tightening around him. Would they see him as a farmer with a vision, or simply a joke beneath the weight of their aspirations? Jack inhaled deeply, poised to share what had been brewing within, desperate to break through their skepticism. But in that moment of uncertainty, as he opened his mouth to speak, the audience shifted. A murmur flickered through the room, a blend of disbelief and scorn written on their faces. And the question loomed, sharp and heavy in the air. Could he transform their lenses of judgment into weeds of acceptance? The air hung heavy with anticipation as Jack's gaze swept across the room, seeking familiar faces among a sea of doubt. With every pulse of his heart, he could feel the judgment penetrating his resolve. They were waiting for him to falter. He could almost hear their unspoken thoughts echoing in the silence. What did a farmer know about revolutionizing agriculture? Jack clenched his fists, the rough fabric of his shirt scratching against his skin, a raw reminder of his roots. He took a breath, willing the tremor in his voice to subside. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he had ever believed in. His great-grandfather's legacy didn't just exist in ancient texts. It lived in the soil beneath his feet, coursed through his veins, and now, it bubbled up to the surface, demanding to be shared. With a newfound sense of purpose, he spoke. words spilling forth like the strong currents of a river desperately seeking the ocean. "I know you see me as just a farmer," he began, the conviction in his voice surprising even himself. "But farming is not just what I do, it's who I am. I've spent years studying methods that can heal our land, that can make us strong and resilient not just for ourselves, but for our children and our future." Some in the audience exchanged doubtful glances, while others leaned forward, curiosity cutting through their cynicism like the first rays of dawn piercing the morning mist. Jack continued, "The world is changing, and if we do not adapt, we risk losing everything we've built. Imagine the possibilities. Sustainable practices, renewable resources, stronger crops. Instead of clinging to outdated methods, we have the chance to be pioneers, to build an economy that thrives by working with nature, not against it." The murmurs shifted, pivoting from disbelief to contemplative whispers. His heart raced at the sight of their faces. The lines of disdain softened slightly. Were they beginning to understand? He pressed on, emboldened by the glimmers of acceptance, each word a seed planted, pushing through the hardened earth of their skepticism. "We can attract new business to Maplewood, create jobs, supply healthier produce, and lead by example. There's wealth here, much more than what glints on polished shoes." Yet even as he spoke, a thread of fear wove through his determination. Would this be enough? Jack's voice faltered for a fraction of a second as he met the eyes of Mr. Simmons, the most prominent business owner in town, skepticism etched in his expression. Confronting that gaze felt like facing a tempest, a challenge waiting to break against his fortitude. "There's not a soul here that loves this land more than I do," Jack asserted, grounding himself in that truth. "And I'm not asking you to abandon tradition, I'm asking you to embrace progress. We can redefine what a farmer is." He stepped back, wrestling with the lingering insecurity that gripped him like a vice. Amplifying this vision risked everything: his relationships, his standing, even his family's legacy. What if he could not convince them? But the energy in the hall began to shift. He could feel it, an undercurrent weaving through the tense silence, a sense of possibility. With a final gaze over the audience, Jack realized he had crossed a threshold. The weight of their judgment felt lighter, a palpable change sweeping over him like a summer rain softening the earth. But as he turned to leave the podium, their reactions were unreadable. Had he gained their respect, or merely sown seeds that might sprout into dissent? The question loomed like an unfinished sentence, a whisper in the back of his mind. He feared what the answer could mean. Was he prepared for the fallout of standing his ground? As he stepped away, the murmurs of the crowd began to swell, an indistinct chorus of uncertainty and disagreement. What awaited him next would determine more than just his future. It would challenge the very fabric of who he was. The moment Jack stepped off the podium, his heart raced, not from victory, but from the uncertainty buzzing in his chest. The crowd's hushed murmurs felt like 1,000 unspoken questions echoing in his mind. Had he truly made an impact, or was he merely thrusting himself into an uphill battle drenched in ridicule? He navigated through the gathering, faces flickering between ambivalence and mild intrigue. But Jack's focus was elsewhere, on what this moment meant for his journey. An unexpected warmth surged within him. He grasped the thread of courage he'd managed to weave, a blanket against the chill of doubt. This newfound understanding was transformative. It wasn't just about changing farming. It was about reclaiming and redefining his identity. Jack moved to the side of the hall, away from prying eyes, and felt the walls close in, mirroring the pressure mounting inside his mind. He needed to solidify his vision, lay down the first stone in the foundation of his revolution. The flickering lights overhead reflected the thoughts racing through his head. He could visualize the maps of land, ideally suited for innovative practices, burgeoning with potential beyond what the community had ever considered. But fear gripped him again. How to proceed? What if he was met with resistance after this moment? Reflecting back on his childhood, he remembered the countless hours he'd spent under the sun, laboring in the fields, wondering why they never tried anything different. Gritting his teeth, he resolved that each day on the farm would now contribute to something larger, to his vision of progress and legacy. The following morning brought a focus he hadn't expected. After delivering a reluctant acknowledgement of the audience's split reactions to his pitch, Jack returned to his familiar territory, the fields. Each row of crops was a reminder of the labor and sweat his family had poured into the land, but also the patterns of complacency that had stifled creativity. He pushed his sleeves up and immersed himself in the work, envisioning plans as he tilled soil beneath his hands. Concepts danced in his mind. Crop rotation schemes that enriched the earth instead of depleted it, partnerships with local businesses for shared growth, and educational outreach to transition the townsfolk to a sustainable mindset. Yet, as he pored over the strategies, the longing for validation gnawed at him. How could he bridge the gap between his radical ideas and the entrenched beliefs of his fellow farmers? Jack realized it wasn't just about convincing them of new practices, it was about showing results. His determination hardened. He would implement small-scale demonstrations on his farm, harvest yields that spoke for themselves, transforming skepticism into curiosity. But the shadows of doubt still loomed. Would anyone follow him? As he pondered these questions, he caught a glimpse of Mr. Simmons in town later that day. Their eyes locked momentarily, heavy with an unspoken challenge that ignited a simmering resolve within Jack. If he could engage Simmons, the very embodiment of old-world ideologies, what would that mean? Would it reshape the vision of farming in Maplewood, or seal his fate as a pariah? Jack needed a plan. He would reach out, engage in dialogue, dismantle the barriers erected by fear of the unknown. It was time to confront the man directly. That encounter could either galvanize support or lead to further isolation. But the struggle of his life had led him here. There was no turning back now. As he walked away, the stakes crystallized for him anew. The relentless pursuit to redefine himself and his legacy depended on the choices he made next. What would happen when Jack finally faced Mr. Simmons? Would he find common ground? Or would the confrontation spark more than just a clash of ideas? Jack stood at the edge of his farm, a thin veil of morning mist lingering over the rows of corn and beans that awoke beneath the rising sun. He had spent the last few days dissecting his ideas, refining his vision into actionable steps. The soil was rich and ready for change, much like Jack himself. This was not just about farming. It was a quest for validation, not from others, but from within. The clamor of the world outside his fields faded, replaced by the rhythmic sound of his hoe cutting through the earth. Jack took a breath, inhaling the rich scent of freshly turned soil. This was his sanctuary, and here, he could confront the doubts that had plagued him since stepping off the podium. Could he redefine farming in Maplewood, while conquering his own insecurities? As he worked, he began to map out a strategy for his confrontation with Mr. Simmons. What would it take to shift an entire paradigm with a single conversation? Could he provoke in Simmons a spark of curiosity? Or would their ideologies clash until only ashes remained? Ideas clashed in his mind as he strategized. Jack knew that unless he engaged Simmons in a meaningful dialogue, his vision would remain just that, an intangible dream. He imagined the old man's face, lined with years of hard labor and traditionalism. Each wrinkle told a story of resilience, yet also rigidity. Jack understood that he needed to reach beyond mere facts. He had to connect on a personal level, harnessing the language of legacy that resonated with farmers like Simmons. Determination surged within him, nudging him to push past his fear. What if he framed his ideas not as disruptive, but as evolutions of their shared heritage? After all, didn't every great innovation stand on the shoulders of tradition? He decided to cultivate a small plot on his farm as a demonstration garden, where he could showcase the potential of regenerative practices. The thought excited him. Hands-on experience would speak louder than words. Jack envisioned vibrant greens interspersed with colorful flowers, a patch that would beckon Simmons and any other skeptics wandering by. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. It felt like the calm before a storm. He jotted down notes, sketching the layout of his demonstration plot, planting symbols of hope within the dots and lines. As he wrote, he noticed a growing urgency. He wanted change to arrive faster than the seasons could provide. Every moment wasted felt like a betrayal of his vision, a betrayal of himself. Early the following morning, Jack walked into town, heart pounding against the rhythm of his strides. He had rehearsed his words, framed his thoughts, and was ready to engage Simmons in a direct yet respectful manner. The townsfolk ambled about, voices mixing into a familiar hum. But Jack was singularly focused on one destination, the diner, where Simmons often gathered with others. As he pushed through the door, He was met with warm chatter and the smell of brewed coffee. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Simmons, hunched over a plate of eggs. Jack felt the familiar twitch of anxiety at the back of his mind. It was now or never. Drawing in a steadier breath, Jack approached, determination replacing hesitation. As Simmons looked up, their eyes locked once again. The challenge was palpable in the air between them. "Mr. Simmons," Jack began, voice unwavering despite the quaking of his nerves, "I think we need to talk." With those words, he stepped out of the shadows of doubt, ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that this moment could define not just his future, but the very fabric of farming in Maplewood. But what he didn't know was how deep the roots of tradition ran in Simmons' heart. Would his words take hold, or were they destined to wither before they even had a chance to grow? Jack stood on the threshold of possibility, his heart racing as the diner's noise faded into a murmur. The weight of the moment pressed on him, a tangible force that almost made him question his resolve. How could a simple conversation redefine everything? He spotted the curious glances from the other patrons, some who had known him his whole life, others who had never paid him any mind until now. "Mr. Simmons," he said, eager to shift the atmosphere before anxiety could take root. The old man's gaze was piercing, demanding respect, but offering none back. A challenge. Jack felt the familiar lump of doubt rise, but pushed past it. "I want to talk to you about something important." Simmons grunted, pushing his plate aside as if to prepare for battle. "Talk? About what?" Jack swallowed, his words spilling out as the thoughts swirled in his mind. "It's about farming, what we can do differently. I've been working on some regenerative practices that could really benefit all of us." A flicker of disdain crossed Simmons' face. "Regenerative? You mean those newfangled ideas from city folk? We've done just fine the old way." That statement hung between them, heavy with the threat of dismissal. Jack's blood surged with frustration. This wasn't just a matter of technique, it was a matter of legacy, of survival in a changing world. Taking a deep breath, he leaned in slightly, his voice lowering, inviting Simmons closer rather than pushing him away. "But you know, don't you? The land isn't the same as it used to be. We need to adapt. Think of our children as children." For a brief moment, something shifted in Simmons' expression. Perhaps it wasn't total resistance that Jack faced, but rather a deeply buried fear of loss, a fear that had held the older farmer captive and unwilling to embrace change. "Look around," Jack continued with quiet intensity. "It's not just about the crops. It's about the soil's health, the community's future. If we don't adapt, we'll only be talking about how good the farming once was. It'll be all history and no future." Simmons leaned back, arms crossed defiantly, a defensive posture that suggested the battle was far from over. "And what do you propose? Planting flowers? Playing with soil?" "That's exactly it," Jack shot back, steeling himself. "Plants that draw bees, flowers that invigorate the soil, practices that restore rather than deplete. I'm starting a demonstration garden on my farm. It's all rooted in what we've done for years, but with modern understanding." Simmons stared at him, disbelief battling curiosity. Jack could almost hear the wheels turning in the old man's head. This was not merely a proposal, it was a lifeline, a possibility he hadn't considered until that very moment. "Demonstration?" Simmons echoed, a hint of skepticism lacing his voice. "You think that LL change minds like mine?" "It will only change minds if you come see it yourself," Jack said, sensing an opening. "Let me show you, and maybe together, we can find common ground. I'm not here to destroy tradition, I want us to grow it." Silence enveloped their table, a world of recognition sparking between them. Simmons was a living testament to a way of life that shaped generations, and Jack was eager for the chance to blend that legacy with new ideas. The tension hung thick, but now, it didn't feel like the end, it felt like the beginning. "All right, kid, I'll look at your garden," Simmons finally said, leaning in slightly, as if conceding just an inch. Jack could hardly contain a smile. It was the first flicker of hope amidst the storm of skepticism. But the reality of Simmons' acceptance also struck him. This was just the beginning of another battle. A deeper question loomed within him. Was he truly ready to face the complexities of pitching his vision to the archaic systems in place beyond just Simmons? As he left the diner, his mind buzzed with uncertainty and excitement, already mapping out how he would build his garden, but also questioning the inevitable pushback he might face. The foundation of change might be laid, but Jack felt the quake of reality at his heels. How many would genuinely be willing to follow suit? And with that thought came another. Would he be strong enough to keep advocating even when faced with backlash? Jack steeled himself for what lay ahead, realizing that the turning of the soil was only the first step in turning hearts and minds. The door of opportunity had creaked open, but Jack wasn't sure how long it would remain ajar. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Jack surveyed the barren patch of land at the edge of his farm. It had once been fertile soil, brimming with crops and potential. Now, it lay neglected, a mere shadow of what had been. This was where the garden would grow, a testament to his commitment and a canvas for innovation. Yet, as he paced the ground, uncertainty knotted in his stomach. Today, he would begin the first steps of transforming a harsh reality into a symbol of hope. But Jack struggled with a realization that clawed at the back of his mind. Change wouldn't just be about the soil. It would be about changing deep-rooted perceptions. With a notepad in hand, he began sketching designs. Raised beds would provide structure, companion plants would promote health and sustainability. Each stroke of his pencil was a reflection of his ambition, yet each line also flickered a reminder of his isolation. As he stood alone under the watchful eyes of towering trees, he questioned whether he could inspire others to share this vision or if he was merely setting himself up for ridicule. The sound of rustling leaves broke his concentration. Jack turned to see his neighbor, Ruth, approach with her arms crossed, a posture that screamed skepticism. She had been one of the most vocal critics of new techniques in the community, her opinions bolstered by years of tradition. "What in the world are you planning, Jack?" Ruth called out, her tone laced with incredulity. "Just starting a demonstration garden," he replied, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "It'll show how regenerative practices can actually help our farms thrive." Her laughter was sharp and dismissive. "You mean fancier terms for old tricks? This is just a phase, Jack. You're chasing a dream that spells disaster for all of us." The sting of her words pierced deeper than he expected. Jack managed a weak smile, shifting back into his determined mindset. "No, Ruth. It's not a phase. It's what we need to survive." She shook her head, unconvinced. As she walked away, he felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and determination swelling within him. Would his efforts ever be taken seriously? It seemed like a daunting task to convince someone like Ruth whose mindset was so entrenched, but he couldn't linger on that doubt. Drawing a deep breath, he refocused on the land, envisioning the growth that could emerge. As he dug a small hole for the first seedling, the physicality of the labor grounded him. Each clump of soil he turned over was symbolic of the groundwork he was laying, not just for crops, but for his very conviction. Days turned into weeks. Jack meticulously planned his garden, choosing seeds carefully and mapping out where each plant would thrive best. He shared his progress on social media, documenting every small victory in the hopes of attracting attention and garnering support. Yet, with each new post, Jack was forced to confront the relentless tide of skepticism from those around him. One particularly harsh comment struck him. "Do you think you'll actually change anything, Jack? Who even listens to a kid in overalls?" Each critique felt like a weight pressing down on his shoulders, threatening to crush his resolve. He paused to reflect. This wasn't just a personal journey. It was about proving to himself that he could navigate through doubt and resistance while championing an idea that spoke to his values. He realized that this journey was as much about his psychological growth as it was about cultivating crops. Who he needed to convince first was not the community, but himself. He had to reinforce his own belief in regenerative agriculture as a viable alternative. And then, an idea struck him. Maybe it wasn't enough to simply plant seeds in soil. Perhaps he could plant conversations in the minds around him. He'd arrange an open day on his farm, inviting neighbors to witness the progress firsthand, challenging their perceptions rather than hiding behind digital walls. The stakes were high, and the potential for public scrutiny loomed large, but Jack felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. The time had come to face his fears head-on, to shift the narrative from skepticism to curiosity. If he could show them the garden, perhaps he could change how they saw him, how they saw farming itself. As he prepared for the event, Jack felt an exhilarating mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was his moment to foster dialogue, but would it translate into meaningful change? One thing was clear. He was no longer just sowing seeds in the ground. He was laying the foundation for a conversation that could redefine the future. But lurking in the background was the unsettling thought. Could he confront not only the community, but also the layers of self-doubt that wrapped around him like a vine? The answer remained just out of reach, like the sunlight breaking through the clouds. Would it be enough to light his path forward? Jack stood at the edge of his garden, uncertainty mingling with self-doubt as he rehearsed how he would present his vision to the community. Day after day, he invested energy into nurturing the soil, but today felt different. He was on the precipice of a crucial conversation. Yet, doubts clawed at him, gnawing at his confidence, whispering that no amount of meticulous planning could silence the skepticism surrounding him. He rolled up his sleeves and set to work, not just in cultivating plants, but also in fortifying his resolve. As he prepared the makeshift seating for the event, he wrestled with anxiety about what could go wrong. Would Ruth come? What if she led the descent? Striking a balance between belief in his project and confronting his fear of judgment was exhausting. Deep down, he knew that this was about more than the idea of a garden. It was about establishing his identity, not just as a farmer, but as an agent of change. Jack took a moment, stepping back to survey the space. The beds he had constructed with care, now adorned with bright green seedlings in neat rows, stood like sentinels of valor against the criticism he felt. It was a concrete manifestation of success amidst the chaos of his thoughts. With each seedling that stretched toward the sun, a small part of him began to believe that he was genuinely capable of more than just working the land. He could inspire others to think differently about agriculture. He went over his notes, each point a comparison between traditional practices and regenerative agriculture. He visualized the nods of understanding from faces that had once shown nothing but disdain. Then, doubt crept in again. What if no one showed? What if the land, no matter how well tended, couldn't overcome his tarnished reputation? Just as he contemplated this, he noticed a young boy, Tommy, playing on the outskirts of his property. Tommy had always had an inquisitive nature, often lingering by the fence to watch Jack work. An idea blossomed in Jack's mind. What if he invited the boy to participate in the garden day? "Hey, Tommy," he called out, waving him over. As Tommy approached with wide eyes, Jack proposed, "Why don't you help me explain to everyone how this works? Your school will have been teaching you about plants, right?" Tommy nodded eagerly, excitement sparking in his eyes. Suddenly, Jack realized it wasn't just about him versus the world. It could be about creating champions of change among the youth who wouldn't suffer the same preconceptions as the adults. Could their innocence and curiosity charm the skeptics? As they worked side by side, Tommy shared bits of knowledge he had absorbed in class, demonstrating that change didn't always have to be a confrontation. Sometimes, it could be a gentle invitation and encouragement to discover something new. Jack was struck by the boy's unfiltered passion. The pure enthusiasm that rushed through Tommy contrasted sharply with the guarded opinions of the adults. Jack suddenly felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this wasn't solely a task to be completed in solitude. Perhaps bridging the gap with innovation could be done as a community effort, guided by the hands of its youngest members. The hour approached, and Jack's heart raced. He scanned the unkempt lawn, now vibrant with color, echoing his own transformation. But then, just like that, a familiar sharp voice pierced his optimism. Ruth appeared, flanked by a few neighbors, and with her presence, the air felt heavy with tension. "What do you think, Jack? Have you made a playpen for your dreams?" His stomach twisted. Deep breaths. This moment could define him. Jack stepped forward, finding strength not just in his garden, but in the meaningful connection he was building with Tommy standing at his side. He could feel the weight of judgment hanging in the air, but for the first time, it crystallized into something he could confront. What if I showed you how things could grow differently? Not just in this garden, but in our minds? Jack's words were a challenge, one he felt ready to meet. What he didn't know was how ruthlessly the truth could be. Would this open dialogue lead to acceptance, or would it expose deeper resentments? The storm of doubt returned. Something told Jack that this encounter would either fortify his vision or disintegrate it completely. As much as he wanted to believe in Tommy and the garden, the true test loomed larger than the sunlight filtering through the trees. Could he indeed withstand the barrage of comments and skepticism that would surely follow, or would his ambition wilt under the slightest pressure? Even as he prepared for the impending confrontation, a smoldering question lingered. What other truths about himself would he be forced to confront today? The air was taut with tension, a tangible force as Ruth's mockery hung like a cloud overhead, heavy and oppressive. Jack glanced at Tommy, who stood beside him. His youthful exuberance zoomed in on Jack's frame of mind, absorbing the atmosphere. In that fleeting moment, Jack was acutely aware that he was not just defending a concept, he was defending his identity. His palms were clammy, sweat beading as he faced Ruth, a formidable reminder of the past he was desperate to reshape. "You're right, Ruth," Jack began, his voice ringing with an unexpected steadiness. "It might look like a playpen, but what if I told you it's a starting point? A place where we can grow ideas as well as plants? Where we can cultivate understanding and community, not just crops." Ruth raised an eyebrow, the slightest smirk playing on her lips, but Jack sensed a shift in her demeanor. The skepticism that had honed her criticisms wavered just a fraction. He pressed on, emboldened by the thought that success was not solely about tangible results, but about perceptions his and theirs. "Let us think outside our boxes for a moment. What if we take these seedlings and create a dialogue? Some of these plants have stories that parallel our lives. Take the tomatoes. They thrive in sunlight, but it takes the right conditions to nurture them, much like trust in a community. You can't rush their growth without hurting them." Jack's eyes scanned the small crowd that had begun to gather. Faces familiar and unknown watched him, captivated not by the garden alone, but by the man who was daring to stand against doubt. With every word, he felt a crack forming in the wall of disapproval. Was it possible he was breaking through? But as he locked eyes with Ruth, he noticed a flicker of something deeper: curiosity, perhaps? The kind of curiosity that came with reflection, not just opposition. "What if you failed?" she shot back, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Wouldn't it be better to stick to what has been done before?" Her inquiry was sharp, slicing through his resolve. Jack inhaled sharply, summoning the courage to confront not just her question, but his own fears. He had to reclaim the conversation. "Failure is a possibility," he acknowledged, his voice steady. "But isn't it also the only way to learn? Every plant you see here started as a seed, buried and seemingly lost. It took time, care, and often a great deal of patience. This garden, like any venture in life, isn't just a single bloom, but a collection of process that invites both success and failure." Tommy shifted anxiously beside him, sensing the gravity of their exchange. Jack took a step closer to Ruth, lower in stature, yet resolute. "If you look at it through the lens of growth, failure is not an end, but a stepping stone. We're all a little like these plants, aren't we? Bent by the storms of life, yet resilient enough to emerge stronger." He felt the warmth of recognition flicker from the gathered crowd. There was a transformation occurring before him, a movement perceptible only to those who truly dared to change, even in the face of harsh criticism. Jack drew in a deep breath, channeling his vulnerability into empowerment. "This is my truth, Ruth. I'm not asking you to agree with my approach, but I am asking you to listen. Together, we can cultivate a garden of understanding rather than division." Ruth's expression softened, her defenses momentarily lowered. Jack felt that the balance of power had shifted, not just between them, but within himself. He had defied doubt, chosen the path of confrontation, and realized he could contest negativity not with anger, but with genuine passion. Yet beneath the surface, trepidation twinkled in his core. What would be the consequences of this moment? With the battle line drawn, he knew that vulnerability could just as easily make him a target. As the murmurs among the crowd began to ripple, Jack sensed the possibility of acceptance and transformation, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. Could he nurture this initial connection into a deeper understanding? Yet as he prepared to respond to the shifting dynamic, another voice broke through, one that he hadn't anticipated. A fellow neighbor spoke out loudly, challenging Jack's revelations. "How can we really trust you, Jack? After everything that has happened?" The inquiry felt like an arrow targeting the very heart of his ambition. Jack's resolve clutched at the edges as adrenaline surged through him, igniting a spark of determination. This was his moment to not just confront their fears, but to face his own. Would he crumble under the weight of their scrutiny or rise above it, proving his worth in a world that had cast doubt upon him? The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, new truths waiting to be uncovered. As his answer formed, one thought lingered ominously in his mind. Was he ready for the role he would have to embrace? The question echoed through the air, a weighty accusation that settled uncomfortably around Jack's shoulders. He felt it pressing against him, a reminder of the past failures that haunted his every step. He forced himself to hold steady, knowing that to yield could unravel everything he had attempted to build. Trust, Jack repeated, his voice low yet unyielding. Trust is earned, not given. I know my past may raise doubts, but I'm here to show you that I'm not that man anymore. The emphasis on anymore lingered, thick with the implications of his journey. He could feel the skepticism radiating from Ruth, the low murmurs of the crowd amplifying his unease. This was the kind of moment that demanded honesty and strength, qualities he had long been trying to cultivate in his own life. Jack paused, watching the faces before him. Each expression told a story, and maybe, just maybe, some of those stories were entwined with his own. What I want is to create something meaningful, not just for myself, but for all of us, he continued, determined to break through their collective hesitance. These plants can be symbols of resilience, but it starts with me acknowledging the ground I'm standing on. I have to earn your trust one step at a time. Tommy shifted beside him, and Jack felt the boy's energy, youthful belief juxtaposed with Jack's internal conflicts. All his life, settling for mediocrity had been his refuge. But standing here, in front of all these questioning eyes, his truest self began clawing its way to the surface. He couldn't let fear dictate his reality any longer. Ruth's critical gaze held steady, as if she were examining every frail inkling of Jack's conviction, but he leaned on that discomfort, transforming it into fuel. What if I fail? He echoed back at the crowd, confronting their worries head-on. That's just part of the process. Each time I plant a seed, I understand its needs better. I learn to adjust the soil, light my approach to nurturing it. Would they see his vulnerabilities not as failures, but as lessons? Jack's heart raced. The past few weeks had shown him glimpses of the leader he could become, yet this scrutiny felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, veering toward uncertainty. Imagine a community built on trust, not fear, he urged, where we face our failures openly, learn from them, and grow stronger because of it. I may wear simple clothes, but my ambitions lie buried deeper, waiting to take root. A ripple of reaction passed through the audience. Tentative looks shifted among them. A flicker of connection sparked in the eyes of some. Jack caught a glimpse of hope surging forward. Look, I can't promise perfection, he confessed, vulnerability laid bare. But I promise effort, consistency, and the willingness to learn from my missteps. I want each of you to hold me accountable and join me in cultivating this journey. Behind Ruth, several people nodded, and Jack felt a tide of unity washing over the doubt that had previously blanketed the space. Yet, he couldn't pull his gaze away from her dark eyes, still skeptical and challenging. As this moment of tentative acceptance flourished around him, Jack became acutely aware of a gnawing urgency. Ruth seemed the epitome of an impassable barrier, and the lingering question remained. Could he break down her walls without sacrificing his own beliefs? With the tension thickening in the air, one notion crystallized within him. This struggle was far from over. Jack needed to confront not only Ruth, but the deeper roots of the doubt embedded within himself. Every step forward would require introspection and, ultimately, a reckoning with the truths that shaped him. But what if their belief in him rose or fell with a single misstep? The stakes had never felt higher, each heartbeat counting down to his next decision. How far are you willing to go, Jack? Whispered a voice in his head, an echo of his own doubts. He squared his shoulders, each nerve ignited with purpose and trepidation. Jack realized that this was more than just a moment, it was the beginning of the true awakening of a man ready to shed layers of his past. And so, as he prepared to face Ruth one last time, he understood what lay ahead might involve not merely external battles, but the confrontation of his very essence. Would he emerge transformed, or would the weight of expectation prove too much? As he opened his mouth to speak again, a sudden noise pierced the quiet, breaking through the fragile tension. A distant shout that clamored for attention, poised to challenge everything he had just constructed. The sun shone brightly as Jack stood before the gathering on his farm, feeling the ebb and flow of uncertainty and newfound determination within him. What had begun as a simple demonstration garden now represented his identity, his reclamation of self, his march against the tide of skepticism surrounding his vision for sustainable agriculture. But facing the townspeople, especially Ruth, felt like extreme pressure, a labyrinth of expectations woven between tradition and innovation. "Jack!" A voice suddenly pierced through the air, drawing Jack's gaze. It was Mr. Simmons, striding forward with a determined look, flanked by a small group of somewhat curious neighbors. "You've planted your little garden here, but it's more than just dirt and seed. I assentee it? What you're asking us to change is ingrained deep. Are you ready to face the uproar if it doesn't work?" The question reverberated through the crowd. Jack felt the weight of every skeptical gaze upon him, compounded by his own internal doubts. He had ventured so far into unknown territory, daring to openly challenge the status quo. He could feel his heart pound, the pulse echoing through the charged atmosphere. But instead of retreating into the shadows of his insecurities, he leaned into the moment with palpable resolve. "I know change is daunting," he began, voice louder now, infused with conviction. "But every successful venture starts with courage and a willingness to learn. This isn't just my fight. It's a path we can walk together. I'm ready to face the challenges. Are you?" Some in the crowd exchanged glances, minds visibly churning. Jack's gaze locked onto Ruth, silently pleading for her to recognize the earnestness in his voice. "You've always been a champion of our traditions, Ruth," he said, projecting his voice as if it were a bridge across the chasm that had formed between them. "But can't we honor those traditions and still evolve? The earth demands it. Our livelihoods depend on it." Her expression bore a complex mix of skepticism and contemplation, an internal struggle playing visibly across her face. "You think just planting flowers and changing the soil will save all our farms?" she challenged. Jackson stepped forward, heart racing, fueled by the urgency of change. "Ruth, I believe it can start that way. The health of our soil and crops affects our health as farmers. We're not dismissing where we came from. We're enhancing it with what we can grow for tomorrow. But it starts here, today, with these seedlings and with all of you." As Jack spoke, each word transformed his uncertainty into vitality. He could feel something shift within him, a sense of empowerment he had yearned for amidst the eye-rolling and mockery. The idea that he could inspire change and bring people together ignited something deep inside. Renewed confidence fueled his passion. "Come see it for yourselves," he urged, gesturing animatedly to the rows of hopeful plants poised to thrive, just as he was through perseverance and nurturing. "Let this garden be our first step. It may seem simple, but its possibilities are boundless. Together, let us reap the rewards of our labor." The crowd began to murmur, and Jack could see expressions transform. All those furrowed brows began softening as they exchanged thoughts. An unexpected feeling surged within him, a growing recognition of his own power and the power that existed amongst the community. Ruth stepped closer, her posture slightly more open than before. "What if we combine what you're doing with the old ways? What if we make it truly ours?" she proposed, hesitation woven with intrigue. "It would take all of us, but I'd like to lend my voice to that." A wave of relief washed over Jack, mingling with excitement. This was a pivotal moment. He had never felt so seen, appreciated, validated. "Yes," he exclaimed, catching several others nodding in agreement. "Together, let us teach one another. Let us intertwine the past with the future. Learn from failures, celebrate successes. That's how we grow." As that thought lingered in the air, the crowd began to react positively. Excited chatter replaced skepticism. An evolution of the community was simmering, bubbling with ideas and possibilities. What had once appeared as divided principles appeared now as intertwined aspirations, cultivated through trust and cooperation. Jack's heart swelled with pride. He had achieved more than just cultivating a garden. He had nurtured a vision, his own profound transformation now resonating throughout Maplewood. The barriers were beginning to crumble, replaced by unity forged in understanding. He had faced the storm of judgment only to emerge empowered and indomitable, a leader, not just for himself, but for his land and his people. Reflecting on the journey, Jack smiled. He understood the truth now. Champions are born not just through external accolades, but through the willingness to cultivate one's vulnerabilities into strengths. With newfound confidence, he met Ruth's gaze. The barriers of doubt diminished, replaced with the glow of mutual respect. The future stood before them, ripe with promise. It was time to plant not just seeds of change, but seeds of hope, a community reborn through collaboration and shared growth. As Jack embraced this moment, he whispered a silent vow to himself. He would nurture this journey and continue to push boundaries, not just in farming, but in everything he held dear. Now, as discovery leads to action, this is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that inspire. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and keep the movement growing. Comment below your reactions and theories about Jack's journey. And share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting this channel through these actions.